In this video, I'm going to share 7 startup fundraising terms you absolutely need to know. Let's get into it. Hey there, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help people start their nonprofits and raise money for their nonprofits. In this video, I'm going to share some fundraising terms that you should absolutely know about, especially if you're trying to raise startup funding. Now, some of these terms may seem really elementary. You may be like, Tiffany, why do you need to explain this to me? But I don't take any assumptions. And also, a lot of people think they know the definition of something, but they may not realize the nuances of it. And they may think they know, but once they hear it, it's like, oh, okay, I didn't understand that there were other pieces to it. So that's the reason why I'm breaking these particular terms down. And there are a bunch of other terms that you need to know, but I wanted to pick these 7 because I thought they were a good mix of things you should know about when you're raising money from the ground up. The first one is your case statement. So any good fundraiser knows before you do any kind of fundraising, you need to create what's called a case statement. And it's basically you making the case for why your organization should receive funding. So don't make the mistake of thinking just because you have 501c3 status or just because you identify as a nonprofit organization that people are entitled, like you have some sense of entitlement that people have to give to you, because that's not enough. Think about it. There are thousands, there are plenty of nonprofits out here, even just in your own state. So what would convince somebody to give to you over them, especially if you're new? Now, I don't think that's a disadvantage, but I'm just trying to make the point is that if they don't know about you, they haven't seen your work, they're not necessarily led to give to you just because you say you have 501c3 status. So what you have to do is get your story together, get your message together, and a case statement helps you do that. It helps you identify what's the problem you're trying to serve, who are the people or the things you're trying to serve, what are they dealing with, what are you putting in place to address that, what does the solution look like when it works, right? Like what's the transformation that happens, what makes you unique? Why would somebody give to you over someone else? And it helps you basically get your life together. I mean, for lack of better words, just trying to make it real simple. It helps you understand how to form a persuasive argument when you're going out there asking donors to give. And it's an important document you can use for grant applications as well, because the same kind of arguments you need to make in that case statement transfer very well to a grant application. So I chose this term first because you need to do this first. You need to go through the work so you can state a really good case for your organization and why it needs funding. The second term is charitable solicitation. Sometimes you'll see it called charitable registration. This one is a sneak attack. This is one that most people don't know about, don't realize, and then when they learn about it, it's like, what? That doesn't even make sense. So charitable solicitation just refers to the process where you have to register in your state if you're going to ask for money from people in that state. Now, not every state requires you to register as a charitable organization, but most do. So the first thing you need to do is check, most likely with your Attorney General's office. It's not always with the Attorney General's office in every state, but it at least is in most. But you could also just Google charitable solicitation or charitable registration and put your state in and see what comes up and look at what's required in your state. In most states, there's a requirement for you to fill out a form, and there's a requirement for a fee. And this is an annual fee. This is an annual process that you have to go through. Some states have an exemption process where if you're not raising a certain amount of money, you don't have to apply or register, but it's all different in every state. So here's the other thing. If you know you're going to be raising money from people who live in a state that you're not in, you also need to check out their requirements because they may require you to register there as well. And that's when it gets messy, because the way the world works now, anybody can give to you at any moment. And some states may see that you having a donate button is solicitation, and they may require that you register before you solicit to people in their state. But how do you know? How do you know somebody's going to give to you before they've given to you? So that's where it gets just a little murky. But I just want to let you know it is a requirement in most states, and you need to check out the rules before you start asking for money so you're not penalized for asking for money. The third term is a grant. Now, this is the one I know people are going to be like, girl, you don't need to explain that, but I think I do. So a grant is a contribution to your organization to fulfill something based on the grant requirements. So it's not necessarily that you're exchanging anything, it's a contribution, right? It's something that an organization like a foundation, for example, is giving to you, but there may be requirements for being able to receive that money. So there may be certain restrictions on how you use that money based on what's in the grant agreement. So some people get caught up with grants in a couple of ways. The first way is assuming that grants always work the same way for-profit businesses versus nonprofit businesses, and they're different. So the for-profit world recently with grants has exploded. It did not used to be this many grants out there for for-profit businesses, but that process is a little bit different than nonprofits because there's so much more opportunity on the nonprofit side, and there's so many different types of grant funders. You have foundations, and under foundations, there are different types of foundations. Then you have corporations who can give to you directly, and then there are government agencies who can grant you, and that may be a federal government agency, state, or local, right? So there's so much more opportunity on the grant side for nonprofits. You just need to understand that the world is a little bit different. The other thing you got to understand is, like, especially when you're getting money from a corporation, a grant and sponsorship are two different things. So say you want to go to a corporation and you want them to give you money for an event, but in exchange for that, they want you to put their logo on your materials. And so they're being marketed to the people who are at your event. They're getting something in exchange for that. That's not a grant. So a grant is just you getting a gift, right? And when you get a gift, there's no expectation that you have to give them something in return, but you do have to meet the requirements of the grant. So I hope this makes sense. See how I needed to explain this? So just remember those key differences. And you can watch other videos that I've talked about grant writing and how to write a grant proposal. I actually have a grant writing workbook to help you write your first proposal, and it also includes a sample grant proposal in there as well. So the next two go together. Number 4 is direct cost. So it's important for you to know as a newbie what it means to have direct cost. And a simple way to do this, because I'm not an accountant, but I'm going to keep it as simple as possible, is what are the costs that can be directly attributed to a program? The reason why this matters is because when you receive grants, sometimes you're only allowed to use the money on a program, on direct costs related to the program. Meaning that if your organization needs to spend money on something else that has nothing to do with that program, you cannot use that grant funding for that. So you need to understand, first of all, the different type of costs in your organization and what they can be attributed to. Is this a cost that is attributed to the program, or is it contributed to program 2 or program 3? So you need to understand that there's a difference, which leads me to number 5, which is admin costs or administrative costs, or sometimes called overhead costs. And those are the costs that you need for your organization to run, whether you're running a program or not. You're going to always need insurance. You're going to always need to pay accountant fees. You may need to consult with an HR person to help get your systems together. You may consult with a consultant to help you do your strategic planning. That's the work you need to do to run the organization, but it's not directly connected to a program per se. It's an overhead cost, right, that supports the overall organization. And those costs are different, and you have to be able to tell the difference so that when you are accounting for grant funding, you're not spending grant funding on non-allowable costs. So I hope the terms that I'm using are not confusing you. The point of it is you need to know the type of cost, the type of expenses of your organization, and what can be attributed to a program. The other reason why you want to do this is because you need to know what it costs to run your program. You need to know by program what it costs to run, and then you also need to know what it costs to run your organization in general. And sometimes you can use some admin dollars to support a program. So you got to know the difference so you can play around with it. So when you're asking for money or you're asking for grant funding, you can make sure that you're asking for enough. Number 6 is financial statements. This comes into play for a lot of people with grant funding. You should be doing this anyway, but a lot of people don't realize they need to produce financial statements until they have to submit a grant. So For financial statements, it could include your statement of expenses. It could include your balance sheet. It's just statements you produce that illustrate the financial health of the organization. It lets you know the status of the organization so that you know if there's trouble on the way, right? Or so that you know and you can strategize for the next quarter or for the next year. So you as an organization, even if you don't have a lot of money, that still is not an excuse for you not to be able to strategize and to think about how you can raise more money. So you should be getting in the practice of producing financial statements at least quarterly, and in your board meetings, looking at your financial reports and looking at your financial statements so that you have a good understanding of where your organization is financially. Whether you realize it or not, as board members, and more than likely as a founder, you are a board member, or if you're watching this, you're a board member, you are responsible. That's one of your responsibilities, to maintain the financial health of the organization. And my question to you is, how can you do that if you don't know the status of the organization, if you don't know where the organization is financially? So financial statements help you assess, and other financial reports help you to assess that. And funders and donors use that information to make their own assessments. So they need to know if they invest in you, they're not investing in a black hole, or they're not investing in an organization that's going down in flames. So they also use financial statements to make assessments about whether or not they want to work with you as well. So it's really important for you to get in the practice, even if you don't have a lot of money right now, first of all, knowing what financial statements you need, and also just doing them and producing them. You can use accounting software like a QuickBooks or like Wave or FreshBooks in order to produce that pretty easily. Or because you may not have a lot of expenses, you can actually produce one yourself. You can just use a spreadsheet with Excel or Google Sheets. Finally, number 7 is my favorite. It's budget. So many people get intimidated, and I also think confused by what it means to have a budget as a startup organization. And the number one thing I hear from people is, well, we don't have any money in the bank, so we don't have a budget. And my pushback to that is, you do have a budget, because your budget is a projection for what you need. It's not a statement for what you have, okay? You use what you have to compare to your budget to see where you are, but your budget is a projection. It's you estimating what you need. You're estimating what it costs to run your programming. So when you look at it like that, it doesn't matter whether you don't have money in the bank or not, because you're looking at what can be or what you're planning for. So you do need a budget, and make sure you're producing a budget every year. So you're looking in 1 year increments to plan for your organization. If you need help with your nonprofit, make sure you visit me at bossonabudget.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.